Excellent. Well, welcome to class. Thank you, CCLD, for helping us produce these classes. We do this with grant money and we are thankful. Woo! We want to make these free for our community and I get paid, which is great, which means I can make more art. So I am super happy to be here. We are starting a year-long journey of oil pastels. So make it to as many of the classes as you can. If you can't make it to everyone, that's fine. I'm sort of having these build on top of one another. So if you have a buddy who can join in March, you want to tell them, let them join in March. I mean, anybody, any newbie can start anywhere along the journey. But I'm really glad that you're here right with us in the beginning. Tonight, we are going to be, I will shut down this background. This background is not helping. I will shut the background down in a minute. We are going to be creating a pair, one pair or two, a pair of pairs. It's up to you. And as you know, if you decide that you're going to make a strawberry, make a strawberry. If you're going to make a pumpkin, make a pumpkin. But just keep making art. I chose a pear because it's easy and it's fun. And it reminds me of my Uncle Fred, who taught me to eat pears from the top down. You get more pear that way. So this is how it works. If you're new to the room, I am going to switch my camera so that you're seeing my work surface. Yes, excellent, excellent. Okay, so this is the size of artwork that we are making tonight. So I just took my sheet of paper, folded in half, so short sides touching. And you can cut it or rip it. Whatever works for you. Or again, if you just wanted to make a line down the center and work on half and not work on the other half, that's fine. So you're going to have one piece of paper that we make our art piece on, and we're going to have a second piece of paper that we kind of scribble on and doodle and play, or go for it and make two. That would be delightful as well. So here's another sample of what our project might look like. I'll bring it back on screen in just a little while. But what I'd like to focus on is BAMO, this one here. So what I've done, and I invite you to lift your supplies. You've got 5 oil pastels in your box, but you'll see that you can make way more colors than 5 that we've got here. And if you want to just play, make some boxes and maybe make them a little bit similar to what I've got, at least make something where you have the red and the green next to each other, but not touching. So I've got red and green next to each other, but not touching. And then I just put out the other colors just so I could play with them. And I invite you to do the same. I've got mine just sitting in a box here so they don't roll all over the place. What else was in your kit was a little container of baby oil. This is just Cheapo Depot baby oil. You've got some cotton swabs. You've got a pencil. And so we're going to be using our fingers, our phalanges today. We are going to be using cotton swabs and oil. But what I'd like you to start with is just start playing with these pastels. Notice that it's packaged so there's one end that sort of sticks out a little bit. These are elevated, these are adult crayons. If you think about these like crayons, they're a lot like crayons. What I love about oil pastels is that for the most part, you can throw away the idea of making precise art. Don't even concern yourself with making precise art. We aren't using tiny little brushes here. These oil pastels, you could take a sharp tool, like a razor or something, and really make a very pointed edge. But I'm going to invite you to not do that. Let them be chunky and big. Let them be inaccurate. Okay? let them be what they are. And that's one of the reasons I love oil pastel so much is they are loose. You have to kind of like give up on exact placement of color. So if you have your red and your green set up, and if you just want to watch me, that's fine. What I'd like you to do is experiment with what happens when you rub your finger. And then rub your green into your red a little, rub your red into your green a little. And as they join, you're gonna get this new hue in between that is not red, it is not green. It is this sort of bricky color. It's heading towards brown. If I put my brown next to it, you can see it looks like cousins of that brown. So these are two complementary colors hanging out with each other and mixing. It's like when I was showing you the color wheel, red and green are complementary. So when they mix, they dull each other down. They become less intense. Now you could take one of your cotton swabs, and if you dip into just a little bit of your oil, you can do the same thing. You can mix back and forth with your red and your green. Isn't that fun? That's so fun. So then I have my yellow, and I put my yellow and the darker green up here, and so we just mix those two, the complementary colors. So now we have this yellow and green, and I put yellow and brown next to each other. So I want you to recognize that as you're mixing these, and we're not going to be using brushes at all tonight, we're using our fingers and we're using cotton swabs. You could use the paper towel or your napkin or whatever you have. You could use that as well. But what I'd like you to recognize is that not only can you push these colors around, you can push them in different directions. So if I push green, so if I push towards green, lift up, come back to green, push green towards yellow, lift up, push green towards yellow. So I'm pushing the dark green towards the yellow, which is a different thing than, I'm getting a little bit more oil, than pushing the yellow towards the green. Do you see? So you can push A towards B, A towards B, or you can push B towards A, B towards A, and you're going to have a different outcome when you're moving these colors together. So it's just something to be aware of, that as we get into our actual project, just something to be aware of. We could do the same thing with, I put brown and yellow together. That depending on which direction I push in, I'm going to have a different effect. Okay. We can also mix colors by laying them right on top of one another. So if I take this yellow, so we have 5 crayons or 5 sticks, right? But we actually can make a whole other color, which is orange, right? So yellow plus red equals orange. We can make a whole other color. I didn't need to give you an orange crayon tonight because we can make it ourselves. So we can mix with our finger, we can mix with a cotton swab. You could put a little oil on your finger. So one of the questions that may be in your head is that archival? It is not. And guess what? Neither are we. Baby oil is definitely not archival. That you could use linseed oil, you could use other oils, but the other oils can, they have their downsides as well. So you have to be careful with linseed oils. You have to be careful with different solvents. This baby oil is non-toxic. It's not going to hurt you. It's good for your skin. So that's why I gave us baby oil. But if you really get into this and you wanted to use more professional grade oils, you absolutely can.
Philomena, did you use the word archival?
Yes.
What does that mean?
Archival means that there's nothing in the supplies that will degrade the material. So if you've ever heard of acid-free paper, like newspapers are ephemera. Newspapers are supposed to denigrate, right? You put them in your recycling, but archival products are supposed to be around forever. So here, so we've had our little experiment. I would love for us to start looking at our clean piece of paper. And we're just going to do some sketching. So I have come up with us doing a pear tonight because it's easy, because it's a simple shape for us to make. Pears come in lots of different shapes and sizes and colors, so you can really make this your own. You can see in the sample here on my right, the one with the checkered background, it's a different, it looks like more like a Japanese pear to me. I've used the reds and yellows in there. I use a couple of other colors that aren't in your kit. This one here with the stripes, all these colors are in your kit. So we're gonna decide on if our pear is gonna lean to the left, lean to the right, or maybe your pear's sitting right up and down. I think a lean is quite lovely. It's sort of lyrical. So that's what I would suggest. All right, and the paper you're using here is it is archival paper. It's specifically for making art, and it is from Canson, Canson. That's the brand we're using tonight. So to get our pear going, our pear starts off with a circle, and don't worry about this. Be light. Hold your pencil lightly. Don't, if you have a death grip on your pencil, please back out a little bit and just, there you go. Just pinch your pencil lightly. Even use your non-dominant hand if you really want to feel loosey-goosey. And we're just going to start with a circle. Now I'm going to go a little darker. Let's see. I'm going a little darker so you can see what's going on my page, but feel free to go light. Okay. I'm going to go quite a bit darker just so you can see what's going on. And then we put a birthday hat on it, a little party hat on it, a triangle. So I'm going to go in this direction this time. So I just have this triangle leaning over to the side, but you can choose left or right. Don't worry about these marks. If you don't like these marks, don't worry about them. You may not see them when we get to the end of this. So we've got a triangle on a circle. So I always like to think about you teaching this to someone else. So anyone can draw a circle, anyone can draw a triangle. So if you're teaching a little kiddo, that's where I would lead them. And now we're gonna make it more voluptuous, more curvy. In the sample that I have here, this one almost looks like a balloon, a water balloon. This one is quite a soft S shape. The one I have here has more hips to it, and I kind of like that. So I'm just going to sketch so that this party hat meets up with this circle a little bit higher. And the same thing on the other side. And I tell you normally to ignore your erasers, but if you want to, you can go in and lightly erase some of the extra lines, but it really doesn't matter. I like seeing all of the maker's marks. I like seeing the pencil marks, but if you're not feeling that, you can lightly erase some of that. Be sure to leave yourself some room for a little stem, which is just sort of another triangle on top. that is your basic pear. And as I said, these oil pastels make it almost impossible to be perfect. So don't worry, you may never see this shape again. If we look at the sample I have here, I've actually colored outside my lines. If you look very carefully right here, you can see this green is coming outside of the line that I had drawn with my pencil, and that's just fine. Make it really exciting for someone who's viewing your art to find these little surprises. You know, it's just a bit of movement. It shows that a human being made this. And to me, that's just super duper exciting. We're gonna put our pear on a table so that we can experiment with shadows and cast color. And how I like to do this, you could freehand it, just give yourself a line and a line. But if you take that other piece of paper that you were working with, so here's my sample. If you take that other piece of paper and you can sort of use it as a template, I'm just going to line it up edge to edge. On this side, I'm lining up this side here so that I can draw a relatively straight line. And if you've been in class with me before, you know straight lines don't often appear in my artwork. So that's a little hack so that you don't have, I didn't measure anything. I didn't grab a ruler, you know, just let it be. And I made it pretty far up on my page so that I have room for a cast shadow. And notice that my table isn't in the center. It's not in the center. There's something in the art world called the rule of thirds. The rule of thirds. So if you think about a tic-tac-toe board, I'm going to put this in air quotes. Good design will tell you that having items somewhere along this tic-tac-toe board in the thirds makes life a little bit more interesting. I could go into a whole soliloquy about how that could be irrelevant. There is something very powerful about centering your art piece, but in general, you put directional lines somewhere in this rule of thirds. And again, it's one of these things, once you see it, you can't unsee it. So my table is not exactly in the center of the paper, and my pear is leaning off to the side. My pear is leaning off to the side. Cool. All right, my other camera just the battery just died, so I'm here. I can't see you anymore, so if you need me, just yell out. Then in the background, we're going to add some sort of interest in the background. In this one here, I had a checkerboard effect. And in the sample we're working on tonight, I put some stripes. You might want to think about polka dots or stars or just about anything that makes you happy. I'm going to do some more stripes. And again, I'm using just my piece of paper to, let me make sure, just to make some lines. You could freehand this. You could get out a ruler, but really, it's not that important that they are perfect. It's more important that you're having a good time. And I am making them relatively the same width, but you could experiment with making them different widths. Cool. So now the real fun really begins. You can make your pear any colors you like. If you wanted to make this a red pear, if you wanted to make it more brown, if you wanted to make it more yellow, it's really up to you. I showed you that we can mix to make an orange color. I'm gonna go sort of the same as this sample here. which was darker green around the edges, brighter green going towards the top of my page. And I'm imagining that this is sitting near a light source or near a window. I'm imagining that so that I can have a shadow underneath the pear. And notice that I've also played with how the background looks. I've gone from a darker background towards the bottom, and I've let like if we pretend this is wallpaper, that the wallpaper gets lighter and lighter as it goes up, because I'm imagining that the sun from the window is coming in sort of in this direction. In this sample here, I did the opposite. I've got this side of the pear brighter. I used yellow, which is typically brighter than these reds here. My checkerboard background, you see it goes from lighter to a bit darker. I've got my cast shadow on this side. So I'm giving a visual interest. I'm telling a story about the light in the room. So you need to decide where your light is going to come from. Is it going to point in the same direction as your pear? Is it going to be from somewhere else? It could be coming from the bottom. If this, you could have the, you know, the sort of the cheeks of your pear highlighted and the top part darker. But I think it's a good idea to think about it coming from some direction, either side and above. All right, so now we get to, now we're coloring. All we're doing is coloring. This is so great. We do not have white in our kit. Notice that there is no white pastel for us today to play with, which means that if you want to keep something white, you have to not color there. These pigments will stain the paper, and they really won't ever lift. You really aren't going to get back to white once you've put your pastels on your paper. So you might want to be mindful of that. How I started this one here, this sample, is I actually drew with my brighter green. I drew a circle to remind myself that this is going to sort of be a highlight spot. So I'm not going to go all the way dark green into there. And then really I just colored. So on top of the color that you're placing and the pressure that you're putting down, also think about the direction of your strokes. You may be able to eventually see some of your strokes. If we take a real close look at the sample here, some of my strokes have been evened out with the oil and me using my finger, and some of them I've left so that you can see the strokes. So you want to think about the direction. Because this pear is a rounded object, I'm sort of going around, back and forth, back and forth. And I'll take my lighter green and mix that in. And then I'm going to take my yellow and put that yellow towards the top. And as long as I've left some white paper showing, I can really put this yellow just about anywhere I want. So that's a good start. I am not going to put too much red in right now. I think I am going to mimic this and use this red background. The reason I'm not putting my red in just yet is because I want to meld these colors. I want to move them around with my oil and my finger first without the red being there. If the red is on my paper and I accidentally push the green into the red, we're going to get that thing again where we get the muddied color when we mix the complementary colors. So I'm not going to put the red in just yet, but I am going to take some of my baby oil and I'm going to start again using direction as I'm moving this around the pear. You can use your finger, you can use the cotton swabs, you can use a paper towel if you'd like. So these pastels are non-toxic, but of course don't get them in your mouth. So if you're working with little kiddos, or if you've got a cat on your lap that likes to lick your stuff, don't, common sense. No licking of the art supplies, please.
Bummer.
And I just think it's so dreamy seeing these colors meld together and how they change and intensify. This is an additive process, meaning we are adding layers of color on top of other layers of color. As I said, you really can't delete or erase the color here. It doesn't work that way. So that would be a subtractive process. This is an additive process. And you can always go back and add more. So kind of let it sink in a little, give it a real good look. It's a real art technique to squint at your art project. If you squint, you get a different perspective of where your shadows and where your light spots are. Mine is looking a little bit like a gourd right now, but I'm all right with that. I'm gonna pick up my brown and I'm gonna put the brown at the edge of where the pear touches the table to lay down a shadow. That really elevates your artwork. When you have a shadow that's placed correctly, that really elevates your art piece from something a little less mature to something more sophisticated. So shadows should always touch the object unless the object is really hovering far away from it. So this dark brown, the darkest brown, is touching the pear. And I'm putting some of the brown into the pear as well. I'm putting some of the brown into the pear as well. And then the shadow can become less intense as it moves away from the object. And feel free to just mix some other colors down in there, really intensify it, really make it interesting. You'll need to decide what color your table is going to be. I'm going to go back and I'm going to work just like I did on this sample here. I'm going to make it yellow again. But it would be a lighter yellow on the side that has more sun. And even let the white of the paper show. And then on the shadow side, it's going to intensify. And it's fine to mix it right through that shadow. And let it be scribbly. There's nothing saying you have to completely block in that color. In fact, I think it's more interesting if you have areas where you can see paper and areas where it's blocked in color. But I like the idea of us having a limited range of colors to work with. It sort of makes us have to be a little bit more clever. And it definitely takes down, sometimes people have analysis paralysis. They can't decide what color they're going to make a thing. Well, if you've only got 5 colors in your hand, it kind of is a blessing in disguise to have to make a decision. Okay, so let's talk about reflections. This pear is sitting on a yellow table, which means that the yellow is going to reflect into this pear. And it also means that this pear, the green of this pear, is going to reflect down into the yellow. So a better way to imagine this is, imagine that you had a juicy red apple on a white paper plate and it's in the sunshine. You can see sun around it. If you had a juicy red apple on a flat white paper plate, that paper plate would look just a little bit red. The color of the apple would affect the plate, and the color of the plate affects the apple. The plate will reflect back into the apple just a little bit, and you'll have a lighter spot. So this is true for our situation too. So where the pear is closest to the yellow table, I'm going to see some of that yellow reflect back. And where the shadow is being cast, I'm going to see some of that shadow bounce back up into the pear. It's called atmospheric color. Atmospheric color meaning that the items in any situation affect the other items in their vicinity. So a green pear on a yellow table, the yellow table is going to be affected and the green pear is going to be affected. Again, it's one of these things that once you see it, you sort of can't unsee it. If you're standing under a tree, the color of the tree is going to be reflected into your skin, reflected on your eyes, on your teeth. And again, it's that thing that that elevates our art projects from, sort of primary school projects to more thoughtful and considerate art. I'm just going back and adding some more green where I think it should be. Working with these oil pastels, you can really take your time because they pretty literally never dry. These oil pastels, you can come back 6 months later, scrape on it, and you'll be able to make marks on this. So this is definitely a project that you can work on for, an hour or so, go have lunch, go have a life, and come back to your art life. And nothing is lost. It's not like acrylic painting where you sort of have to have a plan and kind of interact with that plan pretty quickly. These oil pastels will hang out and let you play for a very long time. I've just added a little brown to my stem. And the reason I made the stem brown is I wanted to create a line of a pattern from the tippity top of the pear coming diagonally through the painting to this bottom side of the pear. Humans like to see patterns. We are always looking for patterns. So by putting a color somewhere in your art piece, you always want to put it somewhere else as well. That way, the viewer will have just a better time looking at your art piece because there's a pattern. If we look at my sample here, I've added little chips of red in my pear and little chips of red in my table. I've done that to do that again, where I'm creating a pattern where you can look around the painting. You can look around the painting and keep seeing red. I like my artwork to be interesting up close and from far away. Like I imagine this hanging in a gallery somewhere, and across the gallery, someone sees it and says, "Oh, that's really interesting. I'm going to stand closer." And when they stand closer, they are rewarded by seeing other little magical things that are happening in the painting. So now I'm going to start working on this background. I chose to go red and green for my sample here because you know it, they're complementary colors. So this bright red being next to this green makes them vibrate in our brains a little bit more than if I had chosen something that was analogous. If this stripe was blue or purple or even the brown, this green wouldn't feel so poppy and bright. By choosing the red, because it's a complementary color, I know it'll offset the green really well. So I'm going to do that again. I'm going to give myself red stripes in the background, and I just have to sort of figure out where I want them to be. Do I want to be red on the edges? So if I do red here, and red here, I think that's quite nice because that means that there won't be white stripes at the edges of my painting. Having light at the edges of your painting sort of allows it to have a feeling like it's flying off. And that's just fine. It's just another composition idea that you need to be aware of. Because I want to give it more of a vignetted feeling, more like it's coming in, I want you to focus on the middle. I'm going to make the edges red and this center stripe red as well. So easy peasy. I am just going to dial in this red, and I'm going to do that same thing where I make it darker at the bottom, and then sort of as it gets closer to the ceiling that it lightens up, just for visual interest. I hope you're having fun, because to me, working with these oil pastels are just so fun. I love the creaminess to them. Again, I love that you can't be super perfect with them. Like, let that go. Just have fun and make art. There is room in the world for people to make perfect art. And there is just as much room for us to make looser, more compelling art in my eyes. You could play around with putting different amounts of pressure on the pastel. You can always turn it upside down, give yourself a better space for your hand. If I'm left-handed, so I try to not drag my hand across this constantly. It's not as bad as like if this was pencil, but it will smear just a little bit. If you keep turning your pastel as you're holding it, as you're working with it, it'll help to keep parts of it from getting too flat if you just keep turning your pastel every once in a while. And that's if you're into colored pencil art, you use colored pencil, that's a really good tip. Keep turning your pencil so that you don't have to sharpen it as often, and you'll get to use your pencils longer. Again, I'm adding a bit of red to the table for visual interest, and because maybe that this wallpaper is reflecting a little bit onto the table here. I'm adding just little dots of red into the green, but I'm not going to mix them. I'm not going to rub them in. I don't want them to turn muddy. But I could make the top a little bit orange if I mix this red and yellow together to give this a little something extra, make it like sort of an orange. Hairs are just so fun to create. They can be so many different colors and pretty simple shape to get right. Do we have any questions? Is there anything I can help with as we're moving along here? After things are blended, I like to go back and add more strokes, as I was showing you in the sample here. Make it so that you can actually see some of the strokes. And you can experiment. You can always unpeel the protective coating on your pastel. So if you start to get too far down, you can always peel back some of the plastic. We've all used crayons before. We know how it happens. In classical paintings, you see there's lots of still lives of fruits and vegetables and food in classical paintings. And really that was just people showing off their riches. Like, we can go to any supermarket we want any time of the year and get a pear, right? But in the 1700s, to have a pear on your table could be a show of real wealth, or a pineapple or a pomegranate. If you lived in a part of the world where they didn't grow, showing that you had grapes that you could just leave out, you didn't need to eat them right away, that was swagger. That was showing, look at all of the luxury that I have in my household, that I can let a pear go uneaten just to sit there.
Philomena, you just answered a mystery that I've had all my life, is why people were painting fruit so much, which I thought would be a rather boring subject, but it makes sense now.
There's a really great joke by Jim Gaffigan that says that the reason you never see still lives of donuts is because people eat donuts right away. No one wanted the apple. And then different fruits could have different messages. So in the Garden of Eden, we typically say apple, but historically it's more likely it was a pomegranate. That if they show a woman holding a pomegranate, then they're saying that she's like Eve. Or pineapples are a symbol of welcome. So if you see pineapples, decoratively in a house, I mean, it's a sign of welcome. Apples can go back to, so when Newton and the apple falling on his head, so there may be some nod to that. And again, depending on where in the world you lived, it may just be a sign of wealth. Instead, they didn't have like cribs on MTV like we do today. So how you showed your wealth is these paintings of all the extra food you had lying around. So as I said, these are practically never going to dry. So you have to think about how you're going to store these. And there are a couple of different things you can do. You could just leave them as they are and lean them up on something, have them somewhere in your house. The air in your house will interact with it. So if you have any, dander or dust in your house, it will start to accumulate because, again, this is oil and it's never really going to dry. So most people will put these behind glass. So you could go somewhere and find an inexpensive frame, have it behind glass. You can put a fixative on this. I would suggest using a spray varnish specifically made for art, not hairspray. I know some, yeah, back in art school, we would use hairspray because none of us could afford like all the art supplies. So don't use hairspray if you can help it. Use some sort of spray varnish. Here's Liquitex. This one's a glossy one. You can find other brands are very inexpensive. Mod Podge might have a spray or something, but I wouldn't suggest you use something where you use a brush as your first layer. And I experimented with that as I was prepping for this class. If we take a look here, if you can see, the red has smeared here. You can see my brush strokes. The reason it's smeared is I tried using matte varnish, which is this. So this is basically, this and this are basically, they're the same thing. One's glossy, one's matte. This just has propellant in it. And this I have to put on with a brush. So when I use something with a brush, it's smeared. So what I would do is I would spray it with something and then put a varnish on it. It is suggested that you let this sit and cure. I have heard up to 6 weeks. I can't imagine ever doing that. I am too impatient. I will let this sit for maybe a week at the most, and then I will varnish these. But if you're just going to put them behind glass, you don't need to really do anything to them. If you want to store these in a notebook or in a folder, I would take some tracing paper and put it over it so that it doesn't transfer onto whatever it is you're storing this in. Like in this notebook here, this is sort of a sketchbook. I can see it's already transferring to the next page. You just need to be mindful that, again, this stuff basically stays wet. And you are warned. And see, even though we were using our fingers to rub, your hands are probably pretty clean. Again, please wash them very well before you eat anything. But this isn't a very messy project, which I like a lot. Again, you can use different oils. We're using baby oil, but you can use linseed oil and other oils. You just need to be mindful of discarding some of those. Again, the baby oil is safe as long as you keep it out of your mouth and your eyes. And here's our final result for tonight. A couple of pears with a shadow, simple materials. I'm excited to see what you made. Thanks for making art with me. See more at Philomena Jack Studio or Patreon. I'd love to see you over there. Thanks.